Facebook. This is Lorena with Synergy Behavior Solutions, and I'm trying to do this on my iPad. So if you are there, please say hi. How do I look at comments here? No, I don't want to write a comment. Hello, Chris. Can you see, am I like horizontal or vertical? Can you do like a thumbs up or like the video if everything's fine? Hi, Jessica. How about trying to see if this is working properly, because on my phone, I can only do it vertically, but I think with this one I have both options, so let me know if that gets weird or whatever. Also trying to figure out what the best location is to try and get not terrible lighting. So, hi everybody, thanks for joining. Vertical and fine, thank you, Jessica. Awesome. So, I have a thing in my house where I work pretty hard on calmness, which I've talked a lot about, and especially for this one. This dog does not default to calm very well, and it's definitely not something that was that she was born with, like the ability to have a dimmer switch. And so we worked on that a lot for years, and she's 5 years old now, and we're pretty good calmness these days. Whereas it used to be that she couldn't even settle for really any length of time. For the first few years of her life, I really didn't get to sit down in my own home for like a year. Because she would be pacing and screaming and whining and barking and trying to crawl on my head and all of the other unpleasant behaviors that equal these varsity level reactive dogs. So, so calmness is something we invest in a lot, and I actually recently did that look at your most listened to tracks on Spotify or whatever. And it was funny because all of my most popular tracks are from the I Calm Dog series, which is where I just play music to relax my dogs. So didn't say much about me except that I prioritize my dog's calmness and welfare. And one of the things that translates to is that it's not just calmness in the house. Picasso really wants to participate in this live. It's also calmness in the yard. So if we are working on things like reactivity on leash, or dogs that are really chasey, like this one, super high prey drive. She's also dog aggressive generally. I've never seen a dog with prey drive like hers, and it's pretty extreme. And so one of the things that I need to be aware of, and that we need to be aware of when we're working with these dogs, is that you can do all of the training in the world when you think it's training time, but if your dog is also practicing and rehearsing those behaviors in other environments and being self-employed, as I would say, in the yard in particular, you're actually not going to make very much real-world progress. So one of the things that I worked hard on was a long period of supervision in the yard for her to prevent rehearsal of chasing, especially with squirrels, because we have a lot of squirrels in Portland. And so does she still chase them? Absolutely. But her control and ability to think when she is that aroused is miles from where it used to be. And so one of the things that Summer also wants to participate. So one of the things that is important to me is working with general calmness and making sure that I'm rehearsing the level of arousal that I want in a particular space. So what I mean by that is that if you ever had a job that you found really stressful, maybe it got to a point where your body was conditioned to experience more stress-related symptoms when you entered that space. So maybe you noticed that when you entered your new job, or you were approaching the door, or that job that you didn't like, or that with the mean boss or whatever it was, or if you were a kid that got bullied in school, you would start to feel physically ill. Maybe your fists would clench, your heart would start to race, maybe your skin flushes. You have these higher arousal responses in particular environments where we have practiced a certain level of arousal. And so the same is true for our dogs. And so if we think about what sort of behaviors is your dog rehearsing in a particular space, we really want to rehearse the behaviors that we would like to see. And we want to rehearse the level of arousal that leads to the choices we want to see. So I don't always want to tell her what to do. I want her to be able to go out into the yard on her own, unsupervised, and be able to be okay. Probably not for a really long time, but now we're at a point where I can let her out and go do my thing for 10 minutes and she's just chilling. And it didn't used to be that way. So one of the things that matters in that context is how she enters the space. So she's the dog, and if you have a multi-dog household, you are probably familiar with this, where you try to go open the back door, and the dogs are like, oh, get out, and then you like open the door, and they explode out with all of that energy. And at my old house, it was like causing these like, hey, excuse me, causing these like claw marks in the hardwood. That's how much like arousal was associated with their exit of the house. I did not want that. I decided that was not a great way to promote calmness in the yard, and so instead I decided that I wanted a calm exit. So there's a few different components to this, and the first thing is, if your dog already has a release cue, you should use it, and you should use it for the yard every single time. If your dog doesn't have a release cue, I'm going to show you a way that I started to build calmness around the door that didn't necessarily require a release cue. To be fair, both of my dogs have a release cue, and I did a live on this a long time ago. I'll probably do another one soon to teach you how to build a release cue into your dog's world. But it's not necessary for the door, because this is a very contextual learning experience as well. So the first thing that I want to think about is, this is a transition. So transitions and thresholds are really intense for most dogs, because transitions and thresholds, whether they're symbolic thresholds or physical door thresholds, our dogs know that on the other side of that threshold is a lot of novelty. And novelty is either really exciting or really stressful for your dog, or both. Excitement and stress are pretty usually in line. And so especially for dogs that know that the type of novelty they'll find in the yard is the really exciting kind, like being able to maybe chase a squirrel or go sniff that spot where the raccoons are always hanging out in the evenings, we're going to get that kind of excitement and anticipation. So I want to disrupt and break up that transition. And the way that I'm going to do that is actually really, really simple. So I want to condition my dog to know that there is going to be a treat for being calm and relaxed on this side of the door. There is also going to be an automatic turn back, look at me, get a treat on the other side of the door. So if you have not worked on this yet with your dog, I recommend starting with your dog on a leash. Yoshi will not be on a leash because she already knows how to do this. But if your dog is the type who has practiced probably hundreds, if not thousands of times, exploding out into the yard, start on a leash. So I really like to have a raised bed or a boundary like this one right by the door, and I actually have one outside as well that I started this process with, but now I don't need the boundary. She's able to turn back to me on her own. And so what I want to do is promote some calmness at first by feeding my dog in a nice calm position, and she usually picks that calm position. She chooses a sit. She doesn't really like laying down usually because I think she's just a princess and it's cold on her belly a lot of the time. And she's also a little more vulnerable in that position, so she will pick either a stationary stand or a sit. You can determine what you want it to be. I think as humans, we're like a little bit too obsessed with our dogs sitting. I try not to cue a sit as much as I can. Now she's offering a down, so I'm going to feed her in that calm position. So what you're going to do is, if your dog is on leash, you're going to feed them a bunch of treats before she gets back on her boundary. Good girl. Feed her a bunch of treats before you exit the door, and then you would be restraining your dog gently. So maybe holding onto the leash. And in this case, I'm going to show you if your dog does have a relatively reliable wait or stay, then I would utilize that right now and start building in the process of slowly opening the door. Okay, let's see if you can still see me. Okay, all right. The lighting is weird, so. Okay, so I have a sliding glass door, and I am going to break down the opening of the door into multiple different steps, and then reward for each of those steps. So hand on the handle, and then feed. And just open it a little bit and feed. And again, if your dog is on a leash, you can just be gently restraining them. If they pull forward, just wait. You don't need to go like no or yell leave it or yell stay or like jerk back on the leash. Just wait. Wait for them to offer a calm behavior and a high rate of reinforcement. Notice how many treats I'm feeding her to encourage her to remain where she is. And she learns that it's in her best interest. It's a really good deal to stay right here. So recommend breaking that down into a lot more steps, but ideally you would get to a point where your dog is figuring out that you opening the door just means they're going to get a bunch of treats in a row. The next step that you're going to do is you're going to give your dog their cue to go outside, and the instant they are crossing the threshold, you will use your marker word. In this case, hers is nice, or you can use their name, whatever you want that they respond well to, or a positive interrupter, like a kissy noise, or a click, or whatever it might be, so that she turns back to you. So in this case, you can see the open door now. In this case, I'm going to give her her release cue for outside. She has a number of them. I'm just going to say go ahead. That's going to be her cue for right now. And the instant she starts to leave, I'm going to mark so she turns back to me, and she's going to get a bunch of treats in a row for turning back away from the environment. Ready? Go ahead. Go ahead. Nice. And then I feed in the house a bunch of times. Again, if your dog is on a leash, this is going to be easier for you if they don't already have that self-control. We don't want our dogs to practice ignoring what we're asking them to do. We want our dogs to be successful in the learning process, okay? So a bunch of treats. Good. And then I would like, okay, go. And then she is allowed to have a calm entrance out into the yard. Nice. Hop it up. If it's easier for you to have clear boundaries, like having a bed right outside your door and having a bed inside, that's what I used to do. I used to send her back and forth between the beds so that she got this really nice slow transition and practiced it a lot. Also, I think it's helpful with this particular method. It's super easy. You're just like, leaving equals a treat, turn back to me. So it basically means crossing a threshold is actually a cue to turn back and check in with my person. All you need to do is have your dog on leash for at least a few sessions when you're letting them out into the yard. It's really about disrupting that transition, and you can get some really nice, calmer and more easily interrupted trips out into the yard. So, we're doing on time here. 12:11. All right. So I'm going to recap that really quick. If your dog already has a release cue, I'm going to demonstrate what that might look like. So in that case, the same way that you might work on a stay, I will usually transfer a cue. So just a few weeks ago, I decided to do this, where me saying you want to go outside and putting my hand on the handle is a cue for Yoshi to offer her wait behavior, which in this case was a sit, which is fine. Break. So can we go outside? So she offers a sit, and then you can wait to cue your dog with their release cue to leave. So in this case, it would look like this. Ready? Break. Yeah. And then feed as soon as your dog turns back. I usually will use a marker word, hop it up, to get the dog to turn back. Or you can use their name. If your dog does not have a release cue, all you're going to do is heavily reinforce being at the door means treats, 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 and calmness. Ready? Treats, treats, treats. Go ahead. Go on. Yes. And then feed, feed, feed. So you can see how she's already conditioned to turn back to me across the threshold. Ready? Get it. Okay, come on. Hop it up. And that's because I do it every single time. So here's the important piece about this process. The important piece is that you are consistent. If you want calmness out into the yard, you have to work at it. So you're going to have to change your behavior a little bit. But what's nice about this is that you don't necessarily have to take your dog out into the yard on a leash. However, that's a different conversation. If your dog spends their whole time being self-employed in high arousal behaviors, you might want to consider doing more leash and supervised time in the yard. But if you want to calm and exit, which I get a lot of these days, which is super nice for both my dogs because I have some issues of redirected aggression from this one onto my other dog. They both walk calmly out into the yard. And sometimes I will play with this level of arousal. This is for folks maybe a little bit more experienced if you already have a nice calm exit. The next step is that I like to power up my release cue by if she sees something that she really wants to chase. Like right before I did this live, there was a squirrel on the picket fence. she was looking at it and she was super excited. And so I asked her for a nice calm behavior on her boundary. I opened the door, and then I asked for 2 or 3 behaviors in a row. So like a hand target, a middle, and various other behaviors. And then I released her to go fly out into the yard and chase the squirrel. And then I recalled her back. So I can use real world rewards in these situations. And what's nice about getting calmness out into the yard is that going into the yard is a reward. So teaching your dog to remain calm for what they want, which in this case is to go out and play and sniff and pee and do all the doggy things, it's pretty easy to build that calmness because you're using the real life reward of exiting the house. Let's see, did anybody ask any questions? Any questions? I don't see any questions. Cool. Super simple. Feed before you cross the threshold, feed after you cross the threshold. High rate of reinforcement. One thing that I have noticed is that most people are really weirdly stingy with treats. Just feed your dog lots of treats. It's okay. They have to eat. And the way that we reward is more important than the number of repetitions that we have. If I can do 12 treats in a row, if I do 12 treats in a row before she leaves the house, and then 12 treats in a row after she leaves the house, I'm going to really supercharge that focus and that ability to turn back and remain focused until I release her to go do her thing. Anyway, hi everybody, thanks for joining. I see Al Joyce, hello. I see Barb and Rose and Laura and Ed. Thank you all. Feel free to drop any questions into the comments. If you have any unique situations that you'd like to troubleshoot for getting some calmness out into the yard, would love to answer them and geek out on it with you. This is just a really simple way of getting a little bit more relaxation. Rehearse the level of arousal that you want in a particular space and think about how you get there. I see a lot of people whose dogs, even before you go for the walk, just getting ready for the walk, they're already losing their minds and over their stress threshold. And if you start the walk that way, that's the energy you're going to get. So be intentional about how you transition from one activity to the next, and it can really impact your dog's choices within that space. Anyway, thanks for joining, and it was good to see you. I'm glad my iPad situation worked. Have a lovely day.